BRICS has formally announced the admission of Argentina, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates onto the BRICS group of countries. The 6 entrants will be joining the BRICS countries as full members from the 1st of January next year. And this is the most significant development out of the BRICS Summit, which was held in South Africa this week. Now, some say it could be a signal of a major shift in global affairs. But joining us now to help us wade through all of this is Professor Chris Landsberg, Chair of the African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy and Director of Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership. Prof, good morning. Thanks so much for coming through.
It's been a minute.
It has been. So lots to catch up on.
I'll just get back at you.
All right. So let's start with BRICS. So, of course, the big announcement is the expansion of the BRICS blocs, which is, of course, one of the key issues of discussion on the agenda. What do you make of that?
It's interesting how you put it, that some punt it as a major shift in world politics. I think it is indeed that. Some may say they expected a broader expansion. I now refer to this BRICS magnified, just to come up with the idea of expansion. No, I think it is significant. I think the candidates makes it very interesting. So let's just go through it quickly. Kudos to President Lula for welcoming in Argentina and almost put to rest this idea that Brazil wants to be the big brother in South America, and there's always been tensions between them. Just one interesting thing about Argentina that many may not know, highly indebted with the IMF, and it actually in the last 2 years, he used the yuan to pay off half of its debt with the IMF, right? I'm not surprised by the 2 Africans, but I expect a backlash for our president. And he may even be asked, was he a gatekeeper? Unfairly so, because only 2 Africans, one in North Africa. But the 3, of course, most talked about are the 3 from the Middle East. And why them? They come with serious resources. So they're bolstering BRICS in that sense. They come with not just financial muscle, but other muscle as well. So yeah, BRICS went from 5 in one day to 11, Sakina. Let me just throw this one last one in. In terms of ICC membership now, there are now only 3 of the 11 that are members. Only 1 that joined, of the 6 that joined yesterday, is a member of the ICC. Argentina, the rest are not. Fascinating dynamics.
It certainly is. And if you look at the inclusion of Ethiopia, if we could just zoom into them, for example, that East Horn of Africa region, looking where Djibouti is, the sort of activities taking place there. What do you read into that?
I'm trying to wrap my head around why Ethiopia. I'm looking for the reasons, because the one document that I suspect you as eager to lay your hands on as I am and many others, we are told there is a criteria document doing the rounds, and apparently Prime Minister Modi, and smart on his part, he insisted on that. Why Ethiopia? And you get given various reasons, right? Others being hosted in the capital, sorry, the AU being hosted in the capital. You now mentioned the Horn, the ports there as a reason. Certainly a serious player in Africa, but people will also say, but not so long ago we had to settle a deadly conflict in that part of the world. I think that the 3 most disappointing countries from Africa, Algeria will ask, what did we do wrong? Nigeria certainly is not going to take kindly to this. Senegal, what's interesting, President Xi had a meeting yesterday with Africans alone. The Chinese play fascinating politics. Just a critical point on China. Why was Indonesia not included? Now, I'm not singling out Indonesia. It just happens to be, of all the countries included, the stronger economy of all of the 6 that were included yesterday. But why did China not include another Asian state? And that invokes ideas of China's near abroad and its sphere of influence, and is going to protect it, even though China rhetorically downplays its hegemonic ambitions.
I tried to make notes as the various leaders were speaking yesterday. President Cyril Ramaphosa, he was talking about, amongst other things, because I just tried to look at some touch points there, the concern about ongoing conflict, since you touch on conflict, and you look at that border dispute between China and India as well, who are, current BRICS member state. Obviously, something needs to be done there, and as you pointed out, we know what's been happening with the Tigray in Ethiopia as well. So all of these conflict areas, quite apart from what Russia is involved in with Ukraine. So that was something that President Ramaphosa touched on. What I also highlighted from what he was talking about was the fairness of the global financial architecture, which is, of course, a massive one, and makes you look again at the members that were who will now be admitted on the 1st of January. Because when I saw the other African states, my first thought was, are there economies bigger than ours or not? That was my first thought, because that would obviously then impact how, or would it impact how big a player we are or how influential a player we are? Do we get, some sort of benefit accruing to us because we are one of the first members of BRICS?
Man, you've asked a number of fascinating questions. I can only surmise, as I put it in an opinion piece today, to come back to an earlier point that I didn't touch on that you asked, some talking about the tectonic shifts in world affairs. And how I describe it in this piece, Sakina, the battle lines have now been drawn between the American-led G7 and NATO democracies promoted through dictation. They impose it, versus a pluriversal, there's all sorts, different political systems. Some would even say there are autocratic states there and so on, but they respect that. So the values of solidarity, all of them. I can only surmise on the key question that you've asked about conflict, it had to be discussed. And if it was discussed during the retreat, because something like that they wouldn't discuss in a plenary session, then it might bode well for India-China relations. There are some tensions there, and Prime Minister Modi makes no bones about the fact that nobody's going to dictate to him about his relations with the West. The one that sounds difficult, Sakina, is actually an easy one. The reform of the global systems, and even UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he was very outspoken and say these are anachronistic, out-of-date institutions, they should reform. Here's the difficult one that people are over-celebrating, but I think we were not very well prepared. I don't think de-dollarization went as well as they should have. So you almost got the sense in the last 24 hours they had to scramble for something that propels them in their direction, to show that they are serious about it. But I think they're walking away with a sense here that the dollar is more ensconced even in the systems of the South, including the BRICS Bank, the new development bank. Then that's the currency with which they trade. Some countries are more advanced, excluding South Africa. We are tardy on that issue. I use the word very bluntly. We are tardy in terms of trading with our own currency. All the other 4 members prior to the 6 joining us now, they've been doing it for a while.
So why? Are we tardy, or are we cautious in doing what we are doing?
That's the time when you and I start to have interesting debates. Let me make an interesting point to touch on a topic you and I discussed last time. I think before the Lady R saga, South Africa really tried to have its cake and eat it. We are welcomed in Western clubs, so it didn't push the envelope further. With how the US reacted to Lady R, it's almost like South Africa, President Ramaphosa has almost come of age in foreign policy as a statesman in a matter of months. He does the family meeting last Sunday on foreign policy. No president has done that, not even the foreign policy president, Mbeki. Why? No, I just don't think Good would follow through. And let me make this link to you. There was a risk that the state visit by President Xi almost overshadowed BRICS. And I think there was a worry, because it's almost like after the state visit, all of the agreements between the two, the bilateral agreements, now almost gets thrown into the BRICS package. And I know India was a bit irritated with that. Why am I mentioning that to you? I think South Africa has now decided it's going to push the envelope vigorously. And here's the good news. SACU, the Southern African Customs Union, where all the members' currencies are pegged to the rand. So every time our rand goes down, they suffer and so on. So we have been doing it, accelerated now. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating in terms of this using local currency to offset the dominance of the dollar. Where the idea of a BRICS currency came from, I don't know who smuggled that one in. You don't create a new currency like the euro overnight. But if I have to tell you, in reality, the yuan, the Chinese tried to downplay it rhetorically. No, we're not a hegemon. We're not here to impose our currency. But all indications are, if they're going to accelerate this thing, the yuan is the currency they're going to go for, or whatever China suggests.
I know this is a tough one because we can't speak in a minute or less, but we are out of time. And I quickly want to touch on a point that President Putin made about economic settlements between BRICS countries. So I thought that very interesting. You know, you were talking about Argentina and their debt that was partially offset with the yuan. So, you know, how important is that for this group?
Oh, very important. And remember, for President Putin, and I'm glad you say that he's the one who raised it, remember, his fallout with the West is at a different level. It is very important. It's now been thrown back to ministers of finance and leaders of reserve banks. I think we are going to see some movement of that. And I just want to give you another final positive point on this score. The two African banks, the African Development Bank and Afrixim Bank in Cairo, they already have this in place. So what South Africa should also learn to do in order to give credence to this idea that it is in favor of the African agenda is insist that BRICS, for example, put some of that $100 billion fund into African initiatives, but it's going to be a shift and start. The one point that I did not make, when the announcement was made about energy, then the question was asked, how will South Africans benefit? All of you asked that questions. The Chinese throat not so veiled a message back to South Africa: get your house in order. For me, the challenge for South Africa, now that the champagne glasses has popped yesterday for a very successful hosting, now the work starts, and can we follow through, and can we follow up, and can we restore state institutions? That for us remains the big issue. Get your act together on the home front.
And of course, I'm going to invite you back because so much we haven't touched on. Lady R, we need to unpack what has happened there and how it impacts on us.